Dealing with the noise here in the auto. It does it in four-wheel drive too, but take a listen. Now that whining you hear is the front diff. And these front diffs on these Chevy trucks go bad pretty frequently. The fortunate news is they're not that hard to replace. This one's going to get replaced with the junkyard part. This is out of a Chevy Avalanche, and this is a Chevy Silverado we're working on, but the Chevy Avalanche one's going to work just fine. It's the GU6. We pulled the RPO code to get the gear ratios and everything correct. And this diff here, it's really easy to fix because it's got the bolt-on axles. So one axle bolts on that side, one axle bolts on that side. You've got an electrical connector for when this thing engages, otherwise it free spools to help you on gas mileage a little bit. And then you got your drive shaft there. Now on the top end, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that hold it together, plus you also have this vent tube that you've got a little tube that comes up and kind of hooks over to something just to keep it out of the way. That's all there is to this job. We're going to do some new fluid, so this is our fill plug and that's our drain plug. We'll go ahead and take care of that as well and show you all of those pieces. Let's get going. Here's all the tools I'm going to need for this job. Transmission jack just makes it easier. You don't really need that, it's not that heavy. And then I got a torque wrench and a couple of 21s and a couple of 15s with a few different ratchets, the impact gun. Got this thing up on jack stands to give myself some room, and I got the creeper. And the only reason I need this bar, I don't have anyone to hold the tires to keep them from turning, so I'm going to kind of cram a bar in there when I go to get these axle bolts out. You'll see what I'm talking about, so that way it doesn't, you know, just keep spinning on me. And here's this idea. This guy just kind of sits in there, leans against the jack stand, so then that way when you're taking this out, the tire can't rotate. I was able to get to 4 of these things in the current position. Now I got to spin it to get to the other 2. So I'll just pull this little bar out there, use my foot. Safety flops are the footwear of choice for this job. And then I'm going to turn it until I can see these other 2 bolts there and there. Shove my bar back into place, hook it around the jack stand like that so it's super safe. And now I'm going to need both hands because I got to impact this thing by hitting it until it breaks loose. We got 5 out of 6 bolts out. If we scoot our eyes right up here, we can take this 6th bolt out. And I'll show you, I didn't take the tire off or do anything stupid like that. Just take that off and separate. That's it. That's all the movement I'm going to need because now it's very clearly separated. When this thing goes to drop down, this isn't going to bind. We will do the same thing over here to the driver's side. Driver's side is done. Let's go do a drive shaft. I've been working on cars for a little while, and I'll tell you, drive shafts for the most part are all the same. It's either a slip yoke or it's bolted in with these straps. This one's bolted in. So we take off these 2. There's 2 others on the other side, and this drive shaft will pull back and down. And same kind of thing here with this yellow bar. It just helps to keep this from spinning while you're taking those bolts out. Just wedge it into a space with that drive shaft there and you can start to take them out. Reach up here for the vent tube. And you're going to want to pop it off. I might have to grab some needle nose here. There we go. Then the electrical connector here just pops right off. I ended up having to get a pick to get this guy out because there's not a lot of room to get your little thingies in there. So you just kind of get a little pick, pry on that, pull it out, and that's all there is to that. Now we just have these 2 bolts and the 2 that look just like it on the other side. That means we got to get a transmission jack in place right here to hold this thing so we can take the rest of the bolts out. Here's the system I came up with. I put it over far enough so I can get my wrench up into those bolts there, and I can also get my wrench easily into those bolts down there. So I'll just leave this in place. I'm going to use my zipper gun and snag those 4 bolts out, and then I'll show you what I got. Fun fact, those are 18s, 21s on the passenger side. Another fun fact, passenger side are nuts and studs, so you can get this thing perfectly aligned. See, it's pretty much right dead center. All I'm going to do when I go to realign this thing is I'm going to put it in place but not tighten it down and get my axles lined up. And then once my axles are lined up, I'll tighten everything down and it should be perfectly in place. Now I can lower my jack and we should be able to see this thing start to sink down. Perfect. Ran into a little bit of a snag. It's catching a little bit on this cross member. So one more step here. I'm just going to take this cross member out. It's 2 bolts. There's nuts on the other side. On the passenger side, same thing on the driver's side. And this cross member just falls right out. All right. Pull that guy out. Pull that guy out. Already did the other side. It is just going to be tight. Fortunately, I got my pry bar. I can just kind of wedge on it until it comes out. Best way to pry it out is to go from behind, and you pry against that big sway bar back there. You don't want to pry against oil pans or anything. That's bad. Hindsight, probably should have done that first. Now, we should be able to go back to where we were 10 minutes ago and just lower this thing out. Again, I'm going to switch back to 2 hands, make sure it doesn't fall off the jack. Important note here, you got to take this electrical connector out of these little wire looms, otherwise you'll rip that out of your harness. So you just take it out, kind of let it hang up out of the way. I'm going to even tuck it over this control arm just to keep it out of the way, and then we can keep going with lowering this thing out of here. Old one's out. There you go. One person job as long as you got a transmission jack. Now before you go to install this, you want to check and make sure that the motor is in good shape. Nothing looks to be broken with the connectors or any of the plastic. Look for leaks around these axle shafts here, and then you got that axle shaft in there. Look for leaks around your drain plugs. Cracks along this casing. I'll show you why. This casing developed a hairline fracture there, but then look at this. It developed an entire hole on the side of the front diff here. Mystery solved. That's what killed this thing. Now I told you it's possible to do this alone, and it is, but having a partner getting it in helps so much. I'll show you why. When you're putting it up, you have about half a centimeter of clearance on this rack and pinion, half a centimeter of clearance on the oil pan, and you kind of have to get the back end up higher than the front end. And what I mean by that is the driver end higher than the passenger end. And while you're doing that, you have to keep it level so that the yoke for the drive shaft can kind of slip back up in over these little dog ears. And then once it's all in, you can get it held into place. Again, leave everything loose until you know it's in the correct place. Everything's going to fit right, and then you can tighten them on down. That axle is in all the way, and I torqued those down. 58 foot-pounds for those of you that want to know. Now I'm working on this one. Again, this piece here, the whole front diff, is still loose. It's still being held in by the jack here. And then we got some bolts that are just kind of there as a safety. But I'm working on these first and the drive shaft before I get everything nice and snug. And with these 58 foot-pounds, you got to go with the star pattern. So you do this one, then that one up there, then this one, then the opposite side, and then you can come back down to this one and go to that one. But it goes like a star, right? Same as you would tighten lug nuts on a wheel, you have to do to these axles. I also use blue Loctite on this. I should have mentioned, this little pry bar technique works just as well for the install as it did for the removal. Drive shaft uses that same technique as well. One on the bolt, and then you wedge something in here. I do about 20 to 22 foot-pounds on these guys. They don't need a ton. Next up is these bolts. So you got the nuts on the passenger side and the bolts on the driver's side. I'm going to star pattern these as well. So I'm going to do this one, and then this is the rear bolt. This is the front bolt. So I'll do the rear one on the passenger side, and then the front one on the driver's side, and then I'll come back to the front one on the passenger side, rear one on the driver's side. 75 foot-pounds on these guys, all 4 of them. Got the electrical connector back on up there. The wire loom is tucked up into the clips. Vent tube is on just above that drain plug there. We got all these bolts torqued down to 75 foot-pounds, all 4 of those. Now we just have to put this rear cross member back in, and then we're going to drain this fluid and refill it with some new fluid and go for a road test. You just fill this with 75/90, that synthetic stuff there, and let it drip out. Once it's dripping out, you know you're full. This is about 1.8 liters, but you can just fill till it comes out of that hole there. Got the transfer case in auto. Gonna hear if I hear any hums. Nothing but the nice hum of a 33 going down the road.